So first remove that UV filter from the front and inspect this lens. Certainly I can see fungus marks there. I'll see if that cleans away, and they may not be on the front surface. They may be at the back of that front lens element. First we'll find out. It's very hard to tell sometimes which surface things are on. It seemed to make absolutely no difference. It's going to hold the tip of a toothpick up against that. Sometimes you can judge where things are relative to something else. I think they're on the inner surface. Okay, so to get to the inner surface, I've got to remove this ring. This is the bayonet mount for the lens. Put those 3 small screws aside so they're not getting anywhere they can cause me any grief. Remove that clip. Now there is a single lock screw here. Back that off. Now I've got to unscrew this. Now one of my friction tools fits nicely into there. So this one. So if I wedge that onto there, I can use that to unscrew that front retainer. There we go. And here is the front lens element, and I am not confident that that fungus is going to go away, so it only remains to try and see what happens. I'm not even sure it's on this surface. Well, no, if I have a go at cleaning it, nothing happens. It wasn't on that surface. It was on that surface and it did clean away. Oh, that's all right. That's good. That's a successful result. So as with the other glass, I'll rotate this. I'll do section by section. And I'm judging by reflected light from the window how clean I've got that glass, because I can see any oily sheen or any disturbance to the reflection. I'll know. That's good. Right, well the main component here, I'll give that a clean while I've got it apart. We've already done the rearmost piece, I think. Let's just do this surface. This of course is quite convex. It makes it very hard to judge from the reflections how clean you have the surface compared with dealing with a flat lens. That looks okay. So, blow off any dust. Put the front element back in position. Screw in the retainer. That's it. Do that up. Check the result. That looks good. Okay. Screw up the lock screw. Take the bayonet mount, put that back on the back of the lens. It locates in one position, the tab locates it. There's 3 screws. It's not especially common to find that you've got problems like that with lenses. It's usually an indication of storage in humid conditions, but certainly anything's a possibility with an old camera. Just wipe around that mount. There's some marks there. They look like fingerprints, but they're not mine. They're long-standing marks. And this can go back onto the shutter, making sure you line up the red dot with the red mark, put it in, rotate, that's clipped into position. Front surface looks good. I'll clean the UV filter and put that back in place, that's not much of a problem. UV filters, they're easily cleaned, and they're not a critical component like a camera lens. So if you clean it with the tail of your t-shirt, that's okay. If you make a mess of it, you can always get another UV filter. That's fine. I'll pop that into place. There we go. That's my lens and shutter assembly all done, ready to go back on the camera. Now I've got to clean the mechanical components and start the reassembly. Well, here you can see the shutter cocking rack from this camera, and I'll shift that weight across a bit. Yeah, so this is a good one. This is what they're supposed to look like. And this is the mutilated teeth that we've got on this cocking rack. That's absolutely shot. There's no danger that could ever possibly work. Just trying to work out what's happened there. From the looks of those teeth, I'd say that the shutter, the mechanism was jammed in some fashion, and that the shutter, the film advance lever was pushed back the other way. That's sort of what it looks like to me. The teeth are swept the wrong way. For it to have stripped in the cocking action, it's much more likely it was stripped by the lever being pushed backwards. That sort of requires that things were jammed up back in the camera body. But whatever the reason, that's a mess, and there's no danger that you could ever get a camera to work looking like that. So I'll start the assembly process. I'll start here assembling the front standard and sliding bellows cover. these components have all been soaked in the degreaser, run through the ultrasonic cleaner once in the degreasing solvent and once in a detergent solution, and then dried very carefully. And this is the part of the shutter release mechanism. It's the finger that transfers the action from the shutter release button and shaft in the camera body through to the shutter body itself. It's an interesting texture of the milling on the side of that section. I'm not used to seeing that. Usually that's smooth. That's working nice and smoothly. That's good. So we have to, here's my two buttons. I want a little bit of synthetic grease. Run it in the top here. This is where the buttons, top and bottom of the front standard, the release buttons sit. They each have a little return spring, which I'll just stretch that out very gently to give it a little bit more tension. That one looks a bit short. No, there's nothing in it. Right. Take these and fit them in place. The springs fit in the holes in here. They do not fit over the posts. They fit in the hole. You put them over the posts, you're going nowhere. Right, now hold those compressed between finger and thumb, and I can slide the front shroud, bellows shroud into position. Check that slides smoothly, and it does. Apply some synthetic grease. Well, what I'm applying the grease to is the guide rail down the middle here. That section slides on that guide rail. So top and bottom, apply a bit of synthetic grease there. And in the centre, that's the buttons. The buttons are under spring tension and they're running against that surface all the time. So lubricate those sections there. You can see the wear marks where that button's trapped in the past. That moves nicely. The other section of the shutter release mechanism is this piece, this T-shaped piece, which fits in at this point. And that's worked directly by the shaft from the shutter release and presses on this finger in turn, which in turn presses on the shutter. That we can pop to one side for the moment. I've got to look at the body. And in the body we have this transfer shaft which takes the action from the shutter cocking rack through to the shutter itself, and I'm checking the state of the teeth on this tiny pinion to make sure they're not bad. Now, there's something stuck on there, just a little bit of something stuck on that tooth made it look like it wasn't quite 100%. That seems okay, so I'll apply some synthetic grease to that, and that goes into the camera body here, and that is in turn held with this bracket. And that bracket is held with a very short round head screw. That's fine. Now I need to take my new shutter cocking rack, which I have helpfully put down somewhere and can't find. Oh, here's this one. And that bracket that holds it there, if that's set too far back, it'll jam against the rack and the rack won't work smoothly. By the same token, if it moves too far forward, the rack can drift backwards and forwards and won't be engaging the teeth over its full width, and therefore would be prone to wearing out. So I want a minimum of clearance between the rack and that bracket, and I found that 4/1000ths of an inch or 0.1 millimetre is a good clearance. So I set that with a feeler gauge, check that that bracket's sitting square, check that that cocking rack moves smoothly in the body. That seems to be good. That's done. Now, our bellows, shroud and so forth can go in. I've got to fit it over the top of that transfer shaft. There we have it. Now, there are 4 screws that hold that in position in the body. I'll find those. 2 go at the bottom. Typically they're the ugliest ones because they were covered in glue and so forth, and they were most reluctant to come out when removing the bellows, shroud, etc. from the body. There's one. I'm just doing that up very loosely. That's the second one. At the top of the camera we have 2. One here, and in the other position our bush had fallen out of place, so I've got to put the bush back inside the inside here. That's always a little bit entertaining. See if I can get that in position. I hold the bellows back out of the way. The bush is flattened off on one side so it locates into the casting. But that doesn't mean that it's easy to locate into the casting. If one's going to fall out, it's always this one, and that's because there's not an awful lot of metal around it, and so it is not held as firmly as its mates. Just got to rotate it into position. No, it's blown out again. Right. I'll bring you back when I've got that thing seated. Hopefully this time I've had the whole lot back out of the body so I could put that bush in place easily. I think it just dropped out again then. I'll check in a second. At least it's not going anywhere. Yeah, as I said, there's almost no metal around it where it's pressed into that section, and as a result it is never held as firmly as its 3 friends. Alright, let me have a little look in there and see if that's seated correctly. Yeah, it looks like it is. I'll just do that up. That's good. Check that the front section slides smoothly, there's nothing catching on there, that's all good. So, the focus mount, which is where? Here. Now I'll slide my shutter release shaft into position so that that piece doesn't get lost in the meantime. Now I can pull this out to the front and the focus mount fits on here. It was held with 4 screws. And this piece I've cleaned by hand. I used to put it through the ultrasonic cleaner as a matter of course, but on many occasions it's anodised. The black finish would start to come away or start to disappear. So it's better to clean it by hand and then not risk that having happen. And of course, if I can avoid things like that from happening, I don't have to repair the damage at a later date, which is always good. I'm not keen on doing hard work for nothing. These 4 screws just hold the focus mount to the front standard. And the inner and outer focus helical are here. I'll assemble them together. They're quite stiff. They're dry of course at the moment. I'm just going to put a drop of naphtha around those. And I've got to get these in position. So I've got alignment marks marked on them, and they need to be rotated into the correct position so that those alignment marks line up when the front surfaces are level, because that's where they were marked for. Let's see where I am, and that's it. That's exactly there. So I've got 2 marks at this side and 1 there. I'll just run a bit more naphtha on there and work this section backwards and forwards a few times to rub off any roughness there. You often find after you've cleaned them that they feel a bit rough, and it'll just be because they're dry, they've got absolutely no lubricant on them, and there are probably imperfections to the surface, oxidation, things of that nature, corrosion, which make them a bit rough. And they're just putting a bit of naphtha on it and working it backwards and forwards. Well, naphtha of course is not a good lubricant, but it's enough to make the difference. Now that moves smoothly, absolutely no problem. So whatever was on there, whatever deposit is now gone. So this needs to be lubricated with a bit of special grease I get for helicals, threads called Helimax XP with lithium and PTFE. And you don't need much. If you clog the thread up entirely with grease, it'll be quite stiff. I usually put a stripe across at about 5 or 6 locations around the thread. Work that in It's nice and smooth. Run some around the outside where the outer helical runs in the mount, and where the two guide posts run in here, they drop into two slots. The slots they drop into are the ones with the holes on them. Now where's up's that way, that's that way, that should fit in there, that drops over those posts, and now the focus is nice and smooth. That helical just swings in and out nicely. Here's our front retainer ring, it only goes in one position. There are 6 countersunk head screws that hold the retainer ring to the focus mount, 4 countersunk screws that hold the retainer ring to the focus mount. On the earlier retinas there used to be 6 doing that job. I'll get these in position. Be careful not to drop them down the hole, otherwise you usually find that they'll fall down easily enough, but they don't want to fall back out, and you can spend all day trying to shake them back out of the camera. They'll happily hide themselves into a pleat in the bellows, and you have to dismantle things to get them back out. Right, so that's all screwed down. Focus moves smoothly. I'll collapse the bellows completely and get the four screws that hold the front standard and the bellows together. They hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. There's 4 screws there, they're the long black ones. Okay, that's done. If I pull that out, check the focus again, that's smooth, that's all good. Needs our focus scale ring next, which unfortunately I have right here. And we have our alignment marks so I can see exactly where it goes back. Even if I didn't have the alignment marks, you can usually see the shadow of the screw heads on the retaining ring, and you can see exactly where they fitted. So 4 screws. Make sure I get the right ones here. There are 4 screws that hold this in place. There are 2 more screws, very much the same in appearance except slightly smaller, that hold the front coupling for the rangefinder in place. So if you mix them up, it's a nuisance. So if you get one of the small screws where the bigger screw should be, it'll go into the hole and then it won't want to come back out. One of them is hiding. That's alright, I've got the 4 I need. So I'll get those screws started. Once they're started, I'll make sure I've got my alignment absolutely correct, and then I'll tighten the screws up. When you're doing up these screws, they don't need to be done up very tight. Don't go crazy doing them up. All that you achieve if you do them up too tight is you'll end up distorting the outer helical, which will make it tight on the inner helical. It won't revolve smoothly, and you end up with stiff focus adjustment. I'm just checking my alignment with the marks top and bottom. That looks good. Just nip those up. There's our focus adjustment done. So the coupling for the rangefinder, This has been through the degreaser, it's been through the ultrasonic cleaner, and there's no oil, there's no lubricant at all in this rivet here, this hinge. And as a result, that can be quite stiff in action. So this is the only spot that I put oil into a camera typically, is that hinge. And I'll just take a little dot of oil on the end of a toothpick and work that around, and instantly that moves freely and smoothly now. That's great. So I can wipe off that excess. That's the only place I ever use oil, and I use it as a single tiny drop. And this fits in here, and it's always a bit awkward to get it positioned correctly. I'll just get rid of that. I've got a few threads of cotton there from when I was cleaning. Get rid of that. This has to wiggle through that slot. Yeah, I can see the arm at the top here. That's where the post that couples to the rangefinder screws into it. So I'll get that in now, because it'll hold everything in place. That's good. Right, now for the other two screws.